On this episode of Public Scrutiny, we'll be reviewing and commenting on BBC Question Time from Weston Super Mare, which aired on the 19th of March 2020. If you enjoy this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more.
On tonight's panel, Matt Hancock, Government Health Secretary, one of the key people involved in decision-making at the highest level during this coronavirus crisis. The Labour Mayor of Greater Manchester and former Health Secretary under Gordon Brown during the swine...
What is it with left-wingers always looking right at the camera? No one else on the panel does it. Watch it back and check for yourself.
Swine flu epidemic, Andy Burnham. Tom Solomon, Doctor and Director of the UK's Emerging Infections Research Unit at Liverpool University. Francis O'Grady, General Secretary of the Trades Union Congress, the TUC. And Michelin-starred chef, television presenter and owner of several restaurants, Angela Hartnett. Now, we're doing a very different programme tonight on Question Time for obvious reasons. For the first time in the history of Question Time, there is no studio audience.
Which has pluses and minuses attached to it. They can't weight the audience, but it also means that the panel won't be subjected to the audience reaction, which means that we won't see it either. It also means that there won't be any awkward questions or comments, and the questions that are put to the panel, given that they're all pre-recorded, will have been carefully chosen with nothing unexpected being asked.
But we will be hearing from the people of Weston Super Mare. They have very kindly recorded some questions for us, and we're going to play them in via video link. But as we are live, we also want to hear from you. So contact us in the usual way on Twitter, on social media, at BBC Question Time, and I will feed in as many questions as I can to our panel, suitably distanced.
Hold on, why are they shipping a crew and panellists around Britain? They could send a small crew to record the video questions and have people message the rest in. Why go to Weston if there's no audience? They could do it from a studio in London.
As we go through the hour. So let's hear our first question tonight, which is from local doctor Jess Elliott.
Hi, my name's Jess Elliott and I'm a junior doctor working in Weston Super Mare. The situation with the coronavirus is a worrying time for us all, and not least us working in what really are unprecedented circumstances for the health service. Many junior doctors are frightened that we will be in the same position as Italy in a few weeks' time with the coronavirus pandemic. How are you going to ration ventilators and other vital equipment for patients and protective equipment for staff when the NHS becomes overwhelmed?
Well read. Well said. I'm sorry, it's just that when you see the mechanisms they use for biasing, you start looking for them everywhere. Thank you, Jess.
Right, well, Matt, since we've got you here,
yes.
Let's start with you. Clearly, that is an issue about ventilators as well as protective equipment.
Yes.
There doesn't appear there's enough of it at the moment. What's being done about that?
Well, this is incredibly important. The frontline staff of the NHS do an amazing job all of the time, but in the coming weeks, they'll be called on for a heroic effort. So I know that there are concerns on the front line around making sure that the protective equipment keeps coming. I can tell you that over the last 24 hours we've shipped 2.6 million masks, 10,000 bottles of hand sanitizer, and we have a growing effort to get that equipment to the front line. So that's a huge government effort that's going on as we speak, and in fact even right through the night we'll be getting that protective equipment out.
So someone like Jess, when can she expect, and other doctors around
Yes.
the UK, to have the right protective equipment? How long will they have to wait?
Well, overnight we're going to get 150 hospitals the next pack of protective equipment that they need. We've got all this in storage in case there's a pandemic like this, and there are literally lorries on the roads right now.
So how soon?
Some hospitals will get it overnight tonight, and then the rest will get their next load before the end of the weekend. So every single hospital will get their next batch of protective equipment before Sunday night.
They're expecting a huge rise in the number of people infected. From what I've seen, people are just short of panicking. There were massive queues outside the supermarkets yesterday morning, and this was from about 7 a.m. You can't blame people for wanting to stock up. Their lives are at risk. Things are going to get a little bit tense.
Now, some of the hospitals that have been running particularly short in the last 48 hours, we've got it to them already. So this is it's a massive effort from the NHS supply chain, and others to make sure that happens. And Jess also asked about ventilators. Ventilators are particularly important because of the nature of coronavirus, and we learned from what happened in Italy that ventilators are critical. We've increased the capacity for ventilators in the NHS already, and we've got this call out. We put this call out at the weekend for people to make more ventilators, because although we're buying them at the moment, we're clearly going to need more. And we've had an amazing response to that. 1,400 companies have come forward, said that they can turn their manufacturing capability to make ventilators. The next thing we then need to do is train people to use them, because a ventilator without a trained operative can be dangerous, especially the invasive ones for the more serious cases. So we're training NHS doctors who are currently doing other things and who are specialists in other things, like, for instance, knee and hip ops, and training them to be able to put the ventilators in case the numbers really get that big.
And can I just ask you, because I think it's 25 EU countries are clubbing together to
Yes.
buy ventilators,
Yes.
In order to bulk buy them. The
Yeah.
UK at the moment is not part of that. Are we going to be part of that?
No, we are invited to be part of that.
I know we've been invited, but at the moment we're not taking part. As I
Yes,
understand it.
we engaged with that process today.
You have got to be joking. Recently it was said that Brexit would mean that there could be delays in getting vaccines to the UK, and I'm not touching that vaccine, by the way. So to engage in a cooperative effort with the EU in the light of that statement seems a bit foolish to me. What if we have to rely on it and then are told that there isn't enough for us, or that there are delays? Well, that's us screwed then, isn't it? Or they could spin it like the EU helped us out. Being part of a big bloc has its advantages, and now that there aren't as many pensioners, we should have another referendum to join the EU. I'm sorry if that sounds bad, but if you think that the idea wouldn't have been considered by them, you're naive. It was them that coined the phrase, the beneficial crisis. They set the precedent, not me.
Now, we're not clear, actually, whether how many more ventilators will get through that process. So, frankly, we're just getting on with it, buying them from around the world, buying them from the UK producers, and turning other companies are turning out. For instance, Formula One have said that they will get their factories that normally create cars and work with their brilliant engineers to create ventilators. The truth is, Fiona, this is going to be a national effort, and we've got to turn the whole resources of the country to how can we best stop the growth of the virus and grow the NHS capacity to deal with it.
So Tom, what's your response to what Jess had to say and what Matt's saying?
Yeah, I think the important point about ventilators are very important. There are plans to make more, as we've just heard about. It may be that we have to be a little bit innovative and creative given the nature of this emergency which we're facing. And I've worked in parts of the world like Southeast Asia and Africa where there are ventilators which are made of a different spec and work in a different way. And it may be that we will use ventilators of that sort so that we can use more quickly. And even in Canada, they're talking about using ventilators where instead of one supporting respiration for one person, you can effectively support several people, up to 9 people, as long as they have a similar need in terms of support.
So do you feel confident we'll have enough of them?
I feel certainly the numbers of ventilators are going up dramatically, but also the numbers of patients are going up. And we are in uncertain territory, so obviously there is a race is on.
Now, by contrast, as I said earlier, outside the supermarkets there are massive queues of people waiting to get in and stock up on supplies, in advance of potential stock depletion and or lockdowns. I reckon if those members of the public were in charge of national requisitions, we'd be in a much better position than we are now, at least where toilet roll is concerned.
But I'm confident that we're doing everything we can to produce enough ventilators in time. In Liverpool, where I'm working, I came from the hospital this morning where I work, and at the moment we have 2 ventilated patients, but we actually have capacity for about 20 ventilated patients. So depending on where you are in the country, clearly in London the strain is greater, so that's where the need for the new ventilators will be first.
And Andy, what's your response to hearing, we've had so many doctors saying that they don't feel they have enough equipment and they feel that they're putting their own lives at risk, and Matt's saying that he's on the way to sorting that.
Yeah, you've got to feel, haven't you, for Jess and her colleagues right now. But I remember hearing it in the summer of 2009 when I was dealing with swine flu. Now, nowhere near as serious as this current situation, but serious nonetheless. So I know how hard it is to be Matt right now. It's a very difficult position. And we've all got an interest in him succeeding. So nothing I will say tonight will be point scoring. I will just kind of give my perspective in terms of where we are.
OK, if that's true, then fair play to you. But so far, all those who said that party politics and point scoring would be bypassed ended up trying to score points by making this a party political issue. We'll see, I suppose.
I was hearing today that staff are reusing protective masks in hospitals at the moment. So I was glad to hear that lorries are on the road tonight, but really that's quite urgent, and it shouldn't be the case that any person in Jess's position should be reusing crucial equipment like that. So hopefully that will be put right in the NHS. But there's social care, and social care staff need that equipment as well. So that's got to be the next priority. But just on capacity, because I remember in the summer of 2009 really sort of agonising about this. How can we get more equipment in? Can we open more intensive care beds? It went through exactly the same thing.
Yeah, and you also had the additional thing where you rushed through a vaccine for NHS staff, which ended the careers of some of them. But I noticed that thing is absent from your recollection of events. It'd be easy for Hancock to mention that, but he won't. Though maybe it could be a reason why Burnham is in support of Hancock at the moment. I wonder if the support will be so strong in the last 15 minutes of the programme.
I hear what the Secretary of State is saying about Formula One and manufacturing capability. I would say maybe go a bit more route one to the private healthcare industry. So there are beds and facilities in private medicine. In your emergency bill, I would say, take a power to take over that capacity. That surely has got to be the first thing that you would do if there was a crucial shortage. We really shouldn't be thinking about rationing. You know, we should be using every power at our disposal to get health capacity available to the public, as well as thinking of other manufacturing solutions that may be out there.
And Francis, what's your view on that? Do you agree with that?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to pay tribute to people like Jess, who are dedicated professionals and doing an incredible job.
Well, you would say that. It's pandering to your members. You'll take every opportunity to show them how much you care. They are the power base of your union.
In difficult circumstances. And as the TUC and unions, we represent, as you know, Matt, staff in the health service. And of course, we're not just talking about doctors and nurses. I think it's really important to remember that we're talking about cleaners and porters and all the other support staff, because without them, our hospitals can't function. And what we're hearing is exactly as Jess is saying, people need they need masks, they need soap, they need equipment to fight this pandemic. Again,
what, they're telling you they haven't got enough soap?
We've had that too. I mean, like I say, you've got to remember this is a team. In the NHS, people see themselves as a team. They know that they depend on each other in order to do the job they have to do. So there are real worries, and we need to get that sorted fast. And I'm also kind of really interested in the ventilators point. It's fantastic if we've got manufacturing companies that are prepared to switch production. Our unions representing manufacturing workers want to do that job, but let's be straight with people. It's often not as simple as it's sometimes portrayed. Switching manufacturing, getting the parts, sometimes from China, not always easy. So let's tell people the truth.
The inference there is that government is currently not telling people the truth. If the manufacturers say that they have or will switch over plants to manufacture needed supplies and equipment, that's all we really need to know. Otherwise, Hancock would have to first of all reassure people that these plants were adapting and then shoot his own words down in flames by casting doubt on his own statement. She has a virtuous position, but then that's her job.
I think we're grown-ups, we can take it. We want to know how long will this take, and in the meantime, how do we get that international cooperation so that we get the ventilators to where they need to be most? And that takes cooperation, not point scoring between nations, but helping each other. And I couldn't agree more with Andy.
So she's an internationalist, or an anti-nationalist, pro-EU presumably, also signalling about point scoring, and surprise, surprise, she criticises Matt Hancock. But she couldn't agree more with Andy Burnham. Those NHS staff whose career were ended with the swine flu vaccine would have been members of your union, no? Short memory or political expediency?
You know, if we're going to pull together as a nation, then those private healthcare companies need to pull their weight.
Look, we've had a message in already. This is from Rhiann Jackson. And it's actually picking up on your point, Andy. When can we expect to see protective equipment being delivered to social care providers?
Oh, now as soon as I heard this, an alarm bell went off in my head. Aside from the fact that Andy Burnham said yes when Fiona Bruce was barely into the word social, I mean, it could have happened the way Bruce said it did. She says the question came in already, but that doesn't mean it came in as the question was airing. Already could mean that it came in earlier that day. So it occurred to me that Burnham could have been told in advance about the social care question, and when it's his chance to speak, he talks about social care, and is later apparently backed up by a question that came in already. This programme is as real as reality TV, which means it's probably completely staged to look like it's real.
Without it, the disabled and elderly won't get the care they rely on in the community or residential setting as their workforce gets ill or worse, transfers the virus, thus putting more pressure on the NHS. So you've talked about when NHS workers, you hope, will have it. What about social care providers? When are they going to get this equipment?
Yes, that is happening as we speak. So every one of the 25,000 different places where people are either in social care in a care home or the providers, those who go out to people's homes, every single one of those providers will get a package of personal protective equipment, and then we'll make sure that more keeps coming according to the scale of their operation. So that it's a very complicated logistical effort, especially with the social care providers, because there are so many. Some are very small care homes, up to the biggest who have lots of homes, and care for lots of people in their own home. So social care is absolutely getting the protective equipment, same as the NHS.
When do you anticipate they're going to, when do you think that's going to be resolved, that issue?
Well, it's being resolved right now, and I would have thought that by the end of next week.
Useless. 28-day incubation period. The staff in those homes and those who visit homes could have already picked it up themselves and passed it on to their clients. Not only that, a client could have picked it up from a social care worker and passed it on to another social care worker, who then passes it on to someone else, and no one would know it happened because no one's showing any symptoms yet. Some social care workers have to go food shopping for their clients. No one would have known that they had it or that they were passing it on. Too little, too late.
Then every social care provider should
have sufficient equipment.
That is the goal. But there's a broader point here, which is that often we talk about the NHS, and especially in political debate, it's about the NHS. Really, the NHS and social care together is critical, especially because this virus is more dangerous for older people, and we've got to look at the whole team.
I know you want to come in, and I just want to, Angela, I know this is, you know, you run many businesses, and we're going to come on, I don't doubt the business aspect of this. I just wonder what you think hearing this, because obviously you are a person who has concerns about either getting this infection yourself or your workers.
But just talking to people today before I came on the show, because obviously this isn't my norm necessarily, but I absolutely think what Francis said, I think facts and accurate facts is what the government need to give us on every level. You know, so if I was running a care home, I would like to know from the government, when is it arriving? Saying overnight next week, if I'm absolutely honest, isn't good enough.
We aren't talking about a food delivery though. Everyone's in the same position. It's not just you or your business, it's all of the care homes and social care providers in the same situation at the same time. I know you want to know now, but logistically it's not possible to give you the answer that you want. As soon as possible, we'll have to do.
You know, I want to know it's arriving in the next 24 hours or it's going to arrive on Thursday. Yeah. You know, to bring it to a personal thing, which I think when we're in a crisis like we are, we all think about ourselves because we're naturally slightly selfish. You know, my cousin, her mother is in a care home. They have coronavirus incidents in that care home and she's over 80. You know, she's absolutely petrified now, as many, many people are. You know, so when is that care home going to get all the equipment it needs to protect the elderly? And I think they probably are the most vulnerable people in society at the moment, you know. So I think, you know, We need the facts to know when all this is happening. And I'm not saying you're saying that, Matthew, Matt, you know, laissez-faire sort of attitude, but the more information and the more accurate information the public gets just creates, you know, we're so nervous now, it will just calm people down, I think.
Actually, it could have the opposite effect. Positive news can be a good thing. What if the news is not good? Classic example. Would you rather know that you were going to die in 5 days, or would you rather not know? Imagine if you knew. What would those last 5 days be like, living with the anticipation?
I think that's totally true. We're trying to just be as transparent as possible, including about the risks.
Yeah.
And as well as about what we're doing about it.
Let me just put another, sorry Andy, let me just put another question in that's come in, because I'm going to try as much as I can to get questions in from the audience, given that it's virtual. This is a question from Louisa. When will frontline NHS staff be tested in England? They are already, as I understand it, being tested in Wales and Scotland, but not comprehensively in England, particularly those having to isolate due to illness. My husband and London intensive care unit doctors stuck at home due to possible coronavirus symptoms. Could be flu. He could return to work sooner if he knew, but he can't afford the private test. Now, we've heard the WHO, the World Health Organization, saying test, test, test. I mean, Tom, what's your view on this? Do you think enough testing is being done among NHS workers?
I think it's critical to test NHS workers. I mean, it's critical to test everybody if we can, and the number of tests that are becoming available are going up. So again, it's these two curves. At the moment, the number of cases is greater than our ability to test, but the testing ability is ramping up. And again, we want the testing ability to overtake the number of cases. But given that at the moment we can't test everybody for the virus, then the priority has to be, first of all, the patients, and that's happening now. And then the second priority, I think, has to be healthcare workers, because at the moment, if somebody, you know, if I have a cough, then I have to go and isolate myself at home for 7 days, and then I will go back to work, and we won't know whether I had coronavirus or not. I might then have another cough a week later, and I'd have to go off again for 7 days.
So do you think we should have started testing sooner?
I think we started testing incredibly quickly. I mean, the minute the Chinese released the information about the genetic information of this virus.
Yeah, I noticed the way that fingers are starting to point at China. I can't see much point in it. What do the finger pointers hope to achieve? Punishment? Compensation? Maybe the implementation of sanctions? If you put China in a bad position where it feels that its very existence is threatened, don't be surprised if it comes out fighting. But then I suppose the virus and its consequences for the world could be used politically to prevent the West from having China involved in 5G or high-speed railways.
Public Health England created a test as soon as they possibly could. And then the issue is about scaling that test up. And when we had, 5-10 cases in January, then I think if somebody had said, look, you need to make hundreds of thousands of tests, that would have seemed unsensible, because you just don't know at the start of an outbreak.
I mean, I can see, Francis, that I know this is your, you are a specialist in infectious diseases, but you're not agreeing, Francis.
And I'm not an expert on public health, but it seems to me that planning for a pandemic was something that all of our authorities could and should have been doing, were expected to do. And it's the scale issue, isn't it? Because, again, let's be honest about this. Health staff and indeed staff in social care are putting their health on the line for us. And it seems to me that the least they deserve is to get tests, and also because that's the best way we can deliver the service, so that we can get people back to work quickly if it's negative.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think, as we've heard, we now have a Department of Health and Social Care. This is one team of workers, and so testing, I think, of key workers goes across the board.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I chaired the first meeting yesterday of the Greater Manchester COVID committee, and I put the call out before I went, what are the issues that you think aren't getting sufficient attention that need to be put up the priority list?
Thanks for taking the time to show everyone how competent you are. No doubt you've also been handing out toilet rolls to the homeless.
And testing of NHS staff and indeed social care staff was the issue that came back.
I mean, NHS staff clearly don't feel it's happening fast enough.
No, they don't.
From what we're seeing it, they're tweeting, they're putting it, there's in the paper.
Sorry, Fiona, you interrupted him. He isn't finished.
Well, this was an area that we focused on a lot in 2009, and I know it was part of the pandemic plan, But I think when there was this sort of feeling about, oh, we're going for a kind of more kind of herd immunity approach, whether the eye was taken off the ball of testing a little bit, I don't know, Matt may say something different.
Ooh, there's the party political point, and it's a critical hit, making the point that testing contradicts the government's 60% of people need to become infected in order that we develop a herd immunity mindset.
What I heard today from a very senior...
The look on his face is of a man who's on the verge of blowing the skin off of a rice pudding. You fall for it every time, Hancock, you plum. Labour say that they broadly support the government and that party politics is out of the window. You enjoy the apparent unity and respect the lack of party politics. Then, at some point, they kick you right in the balls. Every time. If you were going to do it, now would be the time to bring up Burnham's vaccine blunder. Otherwise, you're letting this guy walk all over you, and he'll benefit from it, at your expense.
Manager in the National Health Service was that there is a lot of scepticism in the system, about 25,000 tests per day. And I just would like to hear from the Secretary of State tonight about when could that be delivered, because people are saying they can't see how that can be delivered any time soon, because it requires standing down screening capacity and freeing up lab capacity in other parts of the NHS, and I think people are struggling to see when that will come through. So that is a key issue for people. Like the masks, people want to know exactly when they'll have this kind of reassurance. So if we could address that, that would be.
So when will we see?
Yeah, well, I've been buying tests today. I mean, that's what I've been spending most of my day on today. Tom's absolutely right. Public Health England came out with the first test of this within days of the viral code being made public, and then we've been increasing test capacity all the time since then. We've hit 10,000, and we hit that target sooner than we anticipated. And the problem is that as the virus, the number of people increases on an exponential curve, the number of tests is going up in a linear direction. And we've got a good news, though, which is that from today, we've been able to buy a new type of test, which is instead of having to take the swab, send it to a lab and get it back, which has taken quite a lot of time. And, you know, anybody who's had a test knows that it's taken, a couple of days at best. The new type of test allows you to, it's more like a pregnancy test. You can take it immediately. It's a blood prick, actually,
and
then it goes
to check if you have coronavirus.
That's to check if you have had it and therefore are immune.
OK, so that's a bit of confirmation for us. Once you've had it, you're immune. To the 2019 version of the virus, at least. If you make vaccines, what's the easiest way to make people buy them? Think Hegelian dialectic.
And have the antibodies.
So does that, just so I'm clear, does that definitely work? And is that definitely going to go into production? Are we going to see that anytime soon?
That is in production, and we've been buying them today for the first time.
But that's
it got approved in the last few days.
I mean, that's clearly a brilliant step forward, but
it's a different
and to be
type
welcome,
of test.
it's a different type of
so
test.
We are
what Andy's asking you is the 25,000 tests a day.
Yes.
When's that going to happen?
Well, that's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. We're going as fast as we can, but we're also on the test whether you have coronavirus, which is different from the test of whether you've had coronavirus. The test of whether you have it now, we're also working with some of the leading companies in the field radically to increase the number of those tests. Because I totally agree with Dr. Tedros, the head of the World Health Organization. You know, the way that we can understand what's happening, who's got coronavirus, who's had it, and both treat people better, but also slow the spread, is a combination of understanding who's got it through the testing, who's had it so they can get back to work, and it's only with a combination of technology and testing that we then are going to be able to get a grip on this curve and hopefully, in time, reduce some of the incredibly draconian measures that we've had to take this week.
What I want to know is whether someone who has had it and is immune to it can still pass it on to someone who's not had it yet. It would be bad if immune people go around spreading it to those who think that immune people are safe to be around.
OK, I'm going to take a slightly different tack on the subject just for a moment. I want to hear from another of our people from Weston Super Mare, Nigel Reasons, who owns a shop making blinds in the area.
As a small business owner who employs 9 people, I am concerned about the future of the business. There are many services such as ours where work is in the customer's home. With increased self-isolation, we will be unable to complete existing contracts for some time and unable to plan future work. This means cash flow is poor, my business interruption insurance does not seem to cover me, and yet my moral obligation is to pay my staff and maintain my business. How are the government proposing to help companies like mine? 1 month's payroll would exceed a £10,000 grant.
Right, so that's Nigel there from Weston Super Mare. Andrew, I want to come to you because this is something as an owner of restaurants, this is something you have to deal with right now. So what have you been doing? What have you been saying to your workers?
We, unfortunately, along with many fellow restaurateurs, and I can only speak from London, we've closed. We've actually shut our restaurants. Last night was the last service. That's 4 restaurants I have. That's 140 people approximately that we've asked to go onto unpaid leave. Some may want redundancy, and I've done it for a few reasons. One, because again, it's, as I said before, Matt, it's the information coming from the government. There were so many rumours flying around about, is London on lockdown, will it not be? I employ a lot of European staff.
Excellent. So she's a Remainer then. So that's her, the trade union lady, and Andy Burnham on the left so far, against Matt Hancock. Once again, they use a so-called independent panellist who's pro-EU, and from what she said, she employed 140 staff, and she's blaming the Tories for having to dismiss them. The only unknown at this point is the doctor.
As the capital is in the restaurant business, so I wanted them an opportunity to go home. 2, when the Prime Minister stood up on the Tuesday press briefing and said, don't go to clubs, bars, restaurants, that decimated our business. You know, it literally, 70–80% of the bookings just knocked off.
And what are your employees saying to you? Or what have you said to them in terms of future employment?
We are in daily contact. We are emailing, WhatsApping. We're waiting now. We need initiatives from the government. We don't just need... Fantastic that the Chancellor gave us these billions and billions of pounds. What we need now, if you like, the laws or however the government does it, to say, landlords, give us a 3-month rent-free period. Yes, I am going to pay every single person in the hospitality sector £1,000 a week or £1,000 a month to sustain, cover their rent period. You know, these people, they're on low incomes. It was bad enough when we were treated as an industry where we were called, you know, unskilled labour and unskilled workers. You know, these people have to pay their rent. They have family to support. They have bills to pay. And our industry, you know, we're the 3rd biggest employer in the country, and the knock-on effect for, as this gentleman included, we buy blinds for restaurants. You know, it's not just for homes.
And what about the loans that the government has suggested? Is that any use to you?
I think it will be, but again, it's how we access them. We need to know that the banks are going to actually back up these loans, because talking to we have 2 different banks, they don't seem clear how they're going to work. So again, it's, as I say, information. And 2, it's that double-edged sword. We've now closed our restaurants because we feel that was best for our staff, for our customers, for the health and safety, but there's no income coming through, and we're going to have a struggle when we open up. So when we open up, there's going to be a cash flow issue, and we won't have customers like that. So do I get into a loan of £500,000, £1 million? You know, these are all the questions we need to know. Or if I take that loan, do I have 2 years to pay it back?
Do you know what? I don't care. Like the hotel owner the other week, you had a choice. You chose to employ EU citizens over our own. Your only loyalty was to yourself. It was most profitable for you to staff your business using cheap foreign labour, and now that our nation is going through a bad time, you want our government to help you. And if hospitality is the 3rd biggest industry, and the likelihood is that a lot of those businesses are or have been using cheap foreign labour while ignoring our own citizens, it might actually go some way towards throwing a light on just how many workers have been employed from the EU on the cheap, in the name of you making a profit for yourselves. On behalf of our own workers currently on 0 hours contracts or knocking their pipes out on minimum wage, I hope you go bankrupt.
Then I can seriously say, fantastic, I can pay my staff for 3 months now because I know I've got that period.
Lots of questions.
Lots of questions to answer, and we need the information. And the feeling is it will be coming out, but at 5 o'clock, I'm glued to that TV. What is the Chancellor going to give us?
Yeah. You and lots of people.
Exactly, we all are.
And Francis, obviously this is something you're hearing a lot too.
Yeah, I mean, on small businesses, I mean, even in my local community, I just get that sense of a real need for certainty and detail. because many of those announcements were welcome. Cash flow is a real problem, but if you're living on the edge, then you've got to take decisions, and so you need to be able to access it quickly. And of course, the staff, what happens to them? You know, are they straight onto benefits? Is that it?
I get the impression that her main reason for being a panellist is to sell the idea of workers joining her union. It's not just an abstraction on my part. It seems that Labour and the left, the harder left, as in Momentum, are planning for strikes and political activism. But in order for that to be most effective, one would have to unionise as many workers as possible beforehand. Just because the news is dominated with coronavirus, it doesn't mean that Brexit isn't happening or that Labour have a long time out of power and an agenda that they have to find some way of pushing. People being out of work is the perfect time to sell the idea of joining a union. As we already know, she's an internationalist. I wonder where she was when our own people were being put out of jobs and our wages were falling.
Because a lot of people are going to struggle, and not just small business owners, millions of self-employed people. Sure. Some of them, in our view, not genuinely self-employed, some of them put onto bogus self-employment contracts precisely to avoid paying them basic rights like sick pay. But the idea that they can survive for a sustained period on benefits is a real problem. But you know, this is an argument we're making more broadly in terms of workers. How do we make sure that we don't just bail out the boardrooms? We've got to bail out workers. They've got food to put on the table, children to raise, and you know, statutory sick pay, £94 a week.
Not enough. Not enough.
Matt, I think you'd be the first one to say that you couldn't live on that. I don't think any of us could.
No.
But then he's a government minister, earning a high wage, and no doubt he has a nice house, and his electric bill's probably £84 a week. Then there's his kids as well. It's a false equivalence to compare his life with somebody who waits on tables in a restaurant, but then nobody on that panel lives the same lives as those they're currently talking about.
Right.
So
but you expect others to live on it?
No, I think that we've got to support everybody and support both businesses to help support their staff. We want businesses to support their staff to keep, because the best thing is if people stay in employment. You know, this is a once-in-a-century event.
No, but we know that.
No,
we know that. But what are you saying? Hang on, but we know all that, Matt. But what are you saying? We had the Prime Minister saying today, businesses, you know, keep your employees on. We, you know, support them because we're going to support you. But you've got Angela here saying,
that's right.
I don't know what's going to happen.
That's right. Well, I was coming on to that. This is a once-in-a-century event, and it means that the whole resources of the country has got to be turned on how best we get through this as a country. You know, it's because we're all humans that we're all susceptible to the virus. So we need to all come together to support each other through it. And that, of course, the only organisation that is big enough to do that in a calamity of this scale is the government. So absolutely, we're going to come to the aid of businesses as fast as we possibly can so that businesses can keep their staff on. So you're there when we
But Angela's already let hers go.
Well, no, she's actually kept them on, although on unpaid for now. So we need to come to Angela's aid, because when this is over, I want Angela able to open her restaurants again. And we've got to look after people, we've got to look after businesses, as well as fight the disease. And we've got to use the whole resources of the state to do this.
I have sympathy with what Matt's saying, because...
Watch yourself, Matt. He's already done you once this episode, and what he's doing now is exactly the same as what he did last time. He's getting behind you so he can stab you in the back.
Again, if I look back at our experience, we had an economic crash in 2008. Yeah. And then a health crisis in 2009. Now this government's got them together. And so I absolutely do have a lot of sympathy with what is being said. However, here is the criticism or the challenge. The government has taken a lot of measures this week that have sounded good, but not quite given all the answers that people like Angela have been looking for. But the problem is the government's done the least for the people who need help the most. And I'm talking about people in low-paid, insecure employment, people who are self-employed, people who are on benefits already out of work. And the problem is, the reason why it's a problem for the government is because those people can't follow the government's advice to self-isolate. They have to go into work, and some of them work in social care, and that's not a good thing. So they should have been the first group, I would say, to be helped, not the last.
With this guy and the left in general, the first group that should have been helped happens to be whatever the group is that they're pandering to at the time. They would tell two opposing factions the exact same thing in order to get their vote.
The government really needs to address this. It is cash flow for businesses. Let me be really clear about that. The Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce wanted me to make that point tonight. Businesses need money, and they need it, well, they needed it today, but it's going to have to be tomorrow. But it should come with a condition that the money is used to pay staff and keep them on. Gordon Brown was making this point incredibly powerfully on the radio today.
I get it now. Labour as it is today is so toxic that they have to get someone on from a time where Labour wasn't so tainted. Enter Andy Burnham. And he refers back to Gordon Brown. Bear in mind that both individuals were from the exact government that wrote a note saying that there was no money left. And here's Andy Burnham giving the current government economic advice, and no sign of a challenge from anyone regarding his own previous record.
Because if we keep businesses like Angela's afloat and we keep staff in position, this is the crucial point, Fiona. It will help people now to do the right thing and follow the government's advice, but crucially, it will make the recovery easier after all this is over, because we'll have businesses that are there, staff that are there, ready to go. And the government needs to act on this, Matt, tomorrow. It needs to increase statutory sick pay, as you just acknowledged yourself. It needs to remove the restrictions on job seekers' allowance, increase universal credit, guarantee people's wages with a government contribution to those wages, help self-employed people more than saying apply for universal credit. It needs to do all of these things tomorrow, because that is going to help us in the long term recover from this, not just the health crisis, but the economic crisis as well.
Let's just hear, just quickly, because it plays into that point, from Caitlin Lower, who works in a pub here in Weston Super Mare.
I've recently been working in a local pub on a 0-hour contract, but I was almost guaranteed shifts from week to week. However, since the Prime Minister's advice for the public to stop visiting places like pubs, the custom has dried up and so have our shifts. I'm lucky enough to not have any bills to pay and no one to depend on me. However, there are many who I know that have children to feed and rent to pay that are going to struggle in the coming weeks. What does the government intend to do to help these people?
Again, aside from the fact that she seems to have problems reading her own words, notice that once again Andy Burnham has just spent a while answering the question comprehensively before it was even asked.
I have to say, I'm getting lots of tweets in about exactly that. Now, Matt, I know you're Health Secretary and we're expecting to hear from the Chancellor tomorrow. Is that right?
Absolutely.
But what can you tell us tonight? We're live, lots of people listening, I hope, in terms of the points that Caitlin's made, that Nigel Reasons has made and that Andy's made about what's going to be coming tomorrow.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with the arguments that are being put, and we're going to deliver on that. The first people who we changed the rules to help was in the budget 10 days ago. It feels like a lifetime ago, to make sure that people who, for instance, were in a position of working and not getting statutory sick pay right from the start, they will get that, and we published the legislation to make that happen today, and it is law as of today. The second thing we've got to do is keep people in work, because the best way to make sure that we're ready to bounce back is to keep people in their jobs even when their businesses are struggling or closed, essentially because of decisions that the government has had to make for health reasons. And then the third thing is we've got to directly help people and get money into people's pockets to help them through this.
So you've already said you couldn't live on statutory sick pay, it's not enough. Are people even going to get more than that?
Well, I'm not going to prejudge what the Chancellor is going to say tomorrow, but all I can say is, mark my words, we will do everything we can to make sure that people are supported through this.
It's at this point I remember Boris Johnson telling us to wash our hands for as long as it takes to sing Happy Birthday twice. Knowing what we know now, it seems like a sick joke.
That is the only way to deal with a once-in-a-century event like this, because we've got to keep the whole public together. You know, Andy made the point, I thought, very powerfully, that we are asking people to do incredibly unusual things, for instance, to stay at home and not to go out, and if they're ill, not to go to work, and we've got to make sure that they aren't penalised for doing the right thing. Because the worst thing would be if people go out and spread this virus because they're not given the support to follow the rules that we ourselves in government are having to put in place for health reasons.
Wow, that's a bit rich. You didn't seem too bothered about people spreading the virus because of the dodgy advice you gave us. And the trump card is 60% of the population need to become infected in order that we develop a herd immunity. That counters everything you just said.
So I'm emphatically in support of the action we've taken, hundreds of billions of pounds worth of action, and the action that we're finalising the details.
Will tomorrow answer all of these things, Matt? Because I think I felt a little bit at the moment is these statements every day are half answering things and then not fully answering.
Let me just read you. Hang on. Let me just read. No, wait a minute, Matt. Sorry, I do want to hear you, of course, but I also want to, in our strange, rather virtual way, hear from our audience.
So Burnham's point hangs in the air, and Hancock is prevented from answering it.
So Rosalind Bolton, for example, says there are millions of freelance, self-employed and sole traders who found themselves now with their entire income for many months ahead pulled. The current provisions for employees and businesses don't necessarily include them. Will aid be introduced? And then Martin Clark, I have staff I'm ready to lay off. Fabric cutters and sewing machinists. Why don't you tap into small businesses to make this personal protective equipment?
Yes.
Prevent people needing benefits, protect jobs. Tom, I can see you want to come in.
So, I mean, I'm just interested in the comparison between the scientific and health response and the economic response. It seems to me on the scientific side we have groups like SAGE, SPI-M who do the modelling. We have experts, and the response has been pretty quick, as we've talked about. But on the economic side, it seems like we've been caught a little bit on the hop and we're having to make statements and then try and fill in details afterwards.
Yeah, I get that impression as well, but to be fair, the scientific groups don't have to pay over billions of taxpayers' money to keep the country moving. They just give advice.
And I just wondered, I mean, OK, you've said it's a once-in-a-century event. It's a health event as well as an economic event now. If you compare the two, do you feel that on the economic side things are a little bit lacking, or have people been caught out by it?
No, I think that the response on the economic side by the Chancellor has been unbelievably fast, considering the scale of the economic consequences of the health decisions that we've had to make. But we're just, in government, having to take the decisions of the scale that we have over the past 2 weeks has been extraordinary. And then, of course, the hard question is, how do we turn a decision at one of those podiums in Downing Street into real cash going into people's pockets?
Because you see other, hang on a second, you see other countries who are behind us in terms of the number of deaths, but are doing more to help workers, like paying 75% of their wages, so that they can. They're not stuck on a very small wage, and they can
There's also
stay
the
away
question
from
of
work.
priorities as well. We did something this week with mortgage holidays. Now, that might benefit people, but it will also benefit landlords, when really our priority should have been renters. They should have been our kind of first priority.
Well, you know what? His virtue signalling makes me sick. It's easy for him to say that now, but when he was in government, they ran this country into the ground. The Blair and Brown government cared nothing for the people of this country. They sold us out to big business and the banks. They opened up our borders and betrayed their own core vote. But now he cares.
We've got to do all these things, Andy.
Yeah, true, Matt, but it's a question of not just pace, but who do you prioritise first? And it's that point that you were agreeing with a moment ago. Help the people who can't afford, if they don't get help, they won't be able to afford to follow the government's advice. And I think that the prioritisation has got to be a little more in tune with the level of need.
Well, the first people who we helped were people who otherwise wouldn't have got statutory sick pay. I must say, on the question itself, if you are regularly getting hours on a 0 hours contract, then you are eligible for statutory sick pay, and it's illegal not to pay it. So I just want to make that point.
Matt, let's again be honest, there are 2 million people in this country who don't earn enough to qualify for statutory sick pay.
Again, there she is questioning his honesty. What he just said was, if you do get regular hours, then you qualify for statutory sick pay. It doesn't make him dishonest just because there are those who don't qualify. This still was a good one, though. It shows the 4v1 that's going on.
They earn less than £118, and they're currently being offered, if they do need to self-isolate or get sick, they're being offered benefits. So, let's be frank about that one. But what I think we do all have to play our part. I met the Chancellor today, in fact, to discuss exactly this issue, that we know in Denmark, in Germany, in Sweden, that we've got these schemes that do put money directly into the pockets of workers, so that an employer who otherwise might be thinking, because the credit facility won't help every business. Sure. There are some very significant businesses that we know, our officers on the ground negotiate, come to agreements with those businesses. They know they're in trouble. We know some big decisions will be taken over the next 48 hours. And I welcome the efforts to look at bringing in a scheme that will replace incomes, provide that kind of 75%, 25%, possibly on a very big scale. But we've got to get the delivery. And I do agree that, you know, every day counts at the moment. Our people are dealing with redundancies, layoffs, short-time working. And you're quite right, Matt, that when we get through this, which we must, we've got to have decent jobs for people to hold on to grow our economy, so that all of us will benefit and we fund our public.
I wonder if she's going to suggest the green industrial revolution. To be truthful, I seem to be ignoring most of what she says. It's one big pandering exercise. She annoys me, frankly. That's the thing about unions. If things are good for everyone, no one would join them. They need unhappy workers just like Labour needs downtrodden masses. Without them, they are nothing. Unhappy workers give a union power, which, being left-leaning, is exactly what they want. And how do they exercise that power? Through strikes. They're only too happy to disrupt everybody else in order to get what they want.
Brown spoke about today. He said the two waves of unemployment. You know, you're seeing the first wave now, you know, and then this is going to cause a second wave of unemployment. You know, for, you know, by me putting people on unpaid leave, then they can't afford to go to the shop and they can't afford to buy the clothes, they can't, you know, so
and there's got to be something conditional in there too. I think it's got to be about jobs and fair wages.
Exactly.
All right, look, we've got quite a few questions to get to, so I'm just going to move on if you'll forgive me. So I'd like now to hear from, again, a person from Weston Super Mare, Jacqueline Harris, who's an educational assessment director.
My husband and I are both in our 70s, and my husband has serious health problems. And with carers, I also look after my 94-year-old mother who has Alzheimer's. I'm continuing to collect prescriptions and food because pharmacies can no longer take on more home deliveries, and there's a 3-week wait for online supermarket deliveries. My question is, how do I balance the risks between collecting medication and food and potentially spreading the virus? And how do we ramp up capacity to meet the demands on carers, pharmacies and supermarket workers?
All right, I had to watch this question a few times. Her and her husband are in their 70s. He has a serious health condition and she has a 94-year-old mother. You can probably guess what I'm thinking, but I'm not going to say the words. I'm aware of the groups most at risk and I'm sure the panellists are as well. Let's see what advice they give to her.
And let me just add to that, because we had a tweet in from John Banks. This slightly broke my heart, actually. He said, I'm over 70 years of age and classed as vulnerable. I've tried to book an online shop for my grocery to save going out. The earliest I can get is the 29th of March. How am I supposed to last 10 days with no food? So this is happening right now. I mean, Tom, do you have a view?
Yeah, well, this is happening now, and it's a desperately sad situation. I mean, I think the only positive thing, and one of the positive things that has come out of this crisis, is that we are seeing these community groups cropping up all over the place. We're seeing younger, healthy people volunteering. One of my daughters is actually saying that she's going to help people locally. So in this kind of situation, if we can put people together with those who are not at so much risk if they go and do the shopping, and younger, you know, teenagers, younger adults are not at so much risk, that might be one way. And there's a lot of people.
Because clearly John Banks needs help.
Yeah. He needs help right now. And where is he in the country?
I can't tell you at the moment because I can't quite see from this.
No, but I mean, you know, it's been a fantastic response in many parts of the country that people are coming together to help. But it's obviously not ideal. It's not an ideal situation. But you know, we are in a crisis situation where we're having to use different approaches to sort problems out.
I thought about having someone else help them out as well. But the risk is that a low-risk person could have the virus and not know it. That's why I want to know if someone who's had it could still pass it on to others. That could be the key. those immune to it could help everybody else.
And in terms of what Jacqueline's saying, and balancing the risk between collecting medication, food, and then potentially spreading the virus.
She has to get her medicine. I mean, clearly...
And of course she does. I mean, the question is how she's wondering how to balance the risk.
Oh, it's really tough, isn't it? And you've got to feel for somebody in her position. And it's
well,
it's
lots
true.
of people are going to be in that position.
Tom said there's so much good things happening. And let's focus on the positive for a minute.
It's funny, but you said you have to feel for someone in their position without showing any sign of emotion. But you seem to be shifting about quite a little bit, and we're happy to shift focus onto the positive. As I say, I watched it a few times. I can't just focus away from it. No one who actually empathises could. You couldn't give a damn about them.
There's so many great things about this country, aren't there, when you see a moment like this and people stepping forward to help. In Manchester, Gary Neville made his hotel available to the NHS last night. I mean, the country still is fantastic when you see what people are prepared to do, but more help is needed. And I think this is where somebody in my position comes in, because we can kind of create a people support system for this crisis. So the committee I mentioned before, we met yesterday, and the suggestion is now that we might ask the fire service in Greater Manchester to start ringing people in that position to say, well, what do you need? What more can be done? And we've also then launched a website to mobilise volunteers. So it's not finished yet, but we are trying to build a new support system where we're using all of the capacity that we've got. And the Royal Mail in part of Greater Manchester offered to do some home deliveries of items. So it's coming together. I think we can't just leave it all to be spontaneous and groups doing this and that. We're trying to create a structure through which it can all happen. And I hope next week we should be able to have that beginning to work.
Angela?
I mean, because I think lots of people have done very much the same. There's WhatsApp groups in our little neighbourhood, and we've converse with our local councillor, we've brought in local people, and it literally is who needs help. And there are 80-year-old people that will get deliveries from other neighbours who can do and pick up medicine. And I think, it has to be that community spirit. But if there are initiatives from the local councils to
well, that's it though, and just to say very quickly, we've talked about cash flow for businesses. How about a bit of cash flow for councils? I know it's not popular, but it needs to be said.
A bit of special pleading from you.
World more.
There's a lot of smiles on that panel. I don't know whether they're smiling as an inverse reaction to the question and the questioner or not, but imagine you're an OAP and you're watching this, watching them answer that question that was asked, and you see them all smiling. It doesn't seem right to me.
Now, rather than I used to see it in Westminster, they need more support to do this kind of stuff.
Doesn't it bring out the best and worst in people?
What, like the best in you and the worst in the Tories?
We're honest. I mean, I think we have to, I think actually the Royal Mail initiative is the Posties Union that put that up as a proposition. They want to play a part. But don't we have to hold a mirror up to ourselves? Sure. Because when I looked at some of those supermarket shelves and people sweeping up toilet rolls, soap, all the rest of it, disinfectant, and it was almost like survival of the fittest. And I do understand when we're scared, very often we're thinking about our families first, but don't we also as a community have to think about our neighbours, our workmates, the elderly, the vulnerable, and start getting our heads screwed on about our values in this country?
I bet each and every one of them is stocked right up on everything that they need. Can you really see them standing outside of a supermarket at 7 a.m?
How have we got to this position? I mean, last time you were on, Matt, you mentioned that you said we're working with the supermarkets to make sure if people are self-isolating, they'll be able to get the food supplies they need. As you'll know, lots of supermarkets then turned around next day and said, well, he's not talking to us. So I'm not entirely sure who you meant.
We were talking to the supermarkets.
They said you weren't.
Actually, it was the one guy from Iceland who said that he hadn't been contacted on last week's show, and you'd know that, Bruce.
But maybe they...
One supermarket executive said that they weren't.
A few. No, there was more than one, Matt. Come on, let's
not going to get into it.
All right, OK.
The question
but if we've got a situation now where you've got someone like John who can't get an online shop until the 29th of March.
Look, what I said 2 weeks ago is completely accurate. And the supermarkets, I think, are rising to this. They're not the only part of the answer. But, for instance, Iceland were the first to introduce a silver hour at the start of the day so that people... could go to the supermarket when the shelves had been stacked overnight, if they were over 70, keep 2 metres or 6 foot from other people and therefore stay safe, and get their supplies. And I think that sort of measure from the supermarkets is important. It's really important, just for me to say on public health grounds, you must go out and get your medicines and get food. Just stay away from other people as much as you can.
Well, at least he actually addressed the question she asked. The others seemed to have a nice chat amongst themselves about all the good things they were doing.
If I could just make one point,
there's a broader point, Andy.
Yeah, nice one for shutting him down, Matt. Something else I've observed is the way the left will interrupt people, at least far more than anyone else does. They'll wait until you're on your last sentence and then take it away through interruption.
Which is, yes, we're putting money into councils, and we put £1.6 billion in today. And yes, the councils, this is a moment for councils to really rise, just as you're doing in Manchester as the organising group. But there's also something everybody can do, not only following the rules in terms of self-isolation, but if every single person who is fit and healthy checks the door on their left and checks the door on their right and checks the door over the road and does it in a respectful, community-minded way, then we will find help for lots of people. So yes, the role for government, yes, the role for the charities and for councils, but everybody can play a part in this one.
And in terms of, sorry, just keeping on the supermarkets for a minute, since that was the question there.
Have they forgotten about the lady in the video? They seem to be focusing on the following tweet.
Some supermarkets are making their own decision to have, as you say, this special hour when the elderly can go in, or they're saying you can only buy 4 of something or 2 of something. You're leaving it up to them. You don't think there is a role for government to be saying you can only sell this much to one person at a time? You're happy to leave it up to them, even though we've got a situation where people like John can't get an online delivery anymore?
Well, we've been working with supermarkets for many weeks and to prepare in this eventuality. That work had been going on, and was why I talked about it last time. And it's absolutely got to be these sorts of measures to stop this mass buying have got to be policed by the supermarkets.
Can I make a constructive suggestion, though, Matt? I think you need to give councils an ability to go to the front of the queue with people like John, who needs to get to the front of the queue. Because I was told today, somebody who has cystic fibrosis in their, I think, late 2030s, who doesn't have the ability to get out because of the risk, 3 or 4 weeks had to wait to get food. So there needs to be an arrangement whereby councils can, for people who they are acting for, can kind of go to the front of the queue. And I think that you could put that in place with supermarkets. But come back to this point, councils do need more help. From tomorrow morning, we're waiving the 9:30 restriction on older and disabled people using their bus pass in Greater Manchester.
Everything is an opportunity for him to tell us about all the good things he's done.
Not necessarily have the funds to do it, we're just doing it because it's the right thing, so they can get to those early morning shopping hours that you mentioned. But please do think about the capacity of councils. We've had a decade here where we're not in the best place to face this because the resilience of some of our public services has been really degraded over those years. Your predecessor was on Newsnight the other night and said he regretted the silent social care cuts. He said, well, silent, I was pointing those out to him every single day. He just chose not to listen to what I was saying. You know, there has to be, as Francis was saying, some reassessment when we get through this, and we will get through this, of just how you cannot run essential services that councils provide on thin air. And we do need to remember that, because it's about the resilience of the country at the end of the day.
OK, let's take one more question from Sam Cotto, who, again, is from Weston Super Mare and is an A-level student.
Hi, my name is Sam. I'm an A-level student at Weston College, and my question is, given the cancellation of GCSEs and A-levels this year, what is the fairest alternative for the students that have worked so hard for 2 years? Is it the case that this year group will be the one written off by universities and future employers? So,
Francis, I'm sure you've been talking to head teachers and all sorts about this. What's the view? Where are we heading?
Yeah, well, first of all, my heart breaks for him, and anybody who's had kids that age going through exams knows just how that feels.
Your heart breaks, does it, over that? I'm surprised that your thoughts and prayers don't go out to them.
So, you know, I think it is really important, and I'm sure the government will be on this, that we provide some, you know, real reassurance to that generation of young people that, you know, their
Are you getting
future
any
is
sense
secure.
of how teachers, what they would
Yeah,
like?
I can tell you they are desperate for really clear guidance. So they're glad that a decision has been taken, because what they were seeing was individual schools having to close partly because of their own staff capacity and sickness, all sorts of issues. Yeah. So they're glad that there's a decision. They now need the really clear guidance on who are the children of key workers. Yep. How are we going to make sure that young people get that assessment that is fair and kind to them, given what they've been through? What do we do about kids in poverty, not just kids on free school meals, but we know because of what's happening with their parents that there are going to be more and more children joining the ranks of the poor. How do we look after them? And that's where councils again and voluntary organisations are so important. And also just to remember that teachers are mums and dads too, very often, and they've got those worries about what do I do, or what happens if I need to self-isolate. So, you know, again, we need some real help for parents, I think. You know, we have unpaid emergency leave in this country. Again, unpaid isn't going to put food on the table, so we need a joined up approach. But I think teachers and support staff who are critical too. Again, we need clean schools to keep operating, but they want to be in the room with ministers talking about this, head teachers, support staff, because they're the ones who have to make it work. So they're desperate to have real dialogue.
Let me just relay a tweet that's just come in from Kevin Hooper. When will pupils find out about how GCSE and A-levels are going to be awarded? He then goes on to say, today has been one of the hardest days I've ever known as a teacher. Saying goodbye to these pupils without being able to answer their questions.
I know everything's relative, but when you put their exams next to a global pandemic, which one is the bigger issue? Maybe they don't care so much because they think that they'll be okay, but that doesn't mean that everybody else isn't dealing with a bad situation. Get some fucking perspective. Think about other people. It's not all about you.
Tom?
Yeah, it must be very difficult for them. I've got a teenage daughter who is in that exact situation. She found out yesterday her GCSEs have been cancelled on a background of a couple of weeks of increasing anxiety and increasing numbers of kids not going to school and parents worrying. In fact, I've been doing Twitter polls to try and gauge the public opinion on some of these issues about where they stand compared to what the official advice is. And I think although the scientific advice has been we don't need to close the schools yet in terms of controlling the outbreak, it's become clear that it increasingly was going to be difficult to continue with this situation. I think to try and answer the question from Sam about what's the fairest way, I mean, clearly, when I did, well, they were called O-levels back then.
I remember those. There's quite a few of us on this panel remember those, yeah.
When you did all your work and then everything was assessed right at the end with the exam. But in the intervening years, there has been times when a lot of the assessments are done through looking at coursework and through other assessments. So there is some experience, at least in the community, of how to look at school children's coursework and then make an assessment about their grades overall. So it is going to be a time of anxiety for them, mixed also with great rejoicing. I think some of them are in two minds.
Maybe some of the, yes, hopefully there will mixed feelings perhaps.
Exactly. Some are playing the victim, others are over the moon. How bad is it really?
Clarity and resolution in the next few weeks.
I mean, as I understand it, we're going to hear tomorrow. Is that right? Exactly what's going to be happening with the GCSEs and A-levels and how children are going to be able to proceed?
Well, and this question of the key workers as well, exactly how that's defined. Again, I've been working on that today.
And is there anything you can tell us about that?
Well, for instance, it will include not only NHS staff, but also social care, and those who are working on the supply of medical devices, like the sort of masks that we were talking about at the top of the
program. What about people who work in supermarkets, for example?
Well, the list will be published tomorrow. We know we've got to get it out tomorrow, of course, because the schools are closing to everybody else from Monday. This was a decision nobody wanted to take. It's just an awful situation, and my heart goes out to Sam, who's worked so hard, and everybody in that situation. So we'll get that information out as fast as we possibly can.
Has all of this happened a lot faster than you were expecting?
No, it hasn't. It was all the steps we've had to take were put out in the action plan, 2 weeks ago.
But in terms of fast, I mean, it was only a few days ago, no question of closing the schools.
That's not quite right. We've always been clear that we weren't doing the steps at that moment, but would be prepared to if we needed to. And
true enough, he said it on this programme a week or so ago. I saw it myself.
And then we got to the point where we needed to. We've always said along this terrible journey, as we've been trying to battle this disease, we will do the right thing at the right time. And the decision over school closures had to be made because we've got to get the virus under control. And also, the faster we can get it under control, the faster we can then release some of these measures, as well as putting in place the testing that we were talking about at the start of the programme.
I agree with what Matt is saying. I mean, I think it was the right call, and I remember being in the same position where kind of things that weren't looking like possible all of a sudden become so. Because this week, head teachers were finding things quite unsustainable on the ground, weren't they? Because kids were going off and teachers were going off, and it all became very, very challenging to hold things together. And my daughter is the same, actually, Tom. Mine's an A-level student, so definitely in two minds. Half of her wanted to cry last night and half of her was getting the champagne out. So it was a really strange
they drink champagne in the Burnham household.
Yeah, because he's a champagne socialist.
In terms of fairness, because I have a kind of feeling about this, obviously having spoken to her today, I think there has to be a fair process that looks not just at one thing, not just at predicted grades, but also at mocks and coursework, and takes a rounded sort of view and a fair process there. But then again, maybe let some who want to rerun the year. I know that might create capacity issues in colleges, but this can't be the lost COVID generation, can it? You can't just say, your year just was unlucky, sorry, and no one quite gets the university they wanted and their lives are thrown upside down. I think you need to kind of take the most permissive and supportive approach. And I thought I was hearing that from the Prime Minister yesterday, and I hope that I have confidence that the government will come forward with a fair process tomorrow.
Angela?
Yeah, I mean, you feel for all these people that have studied and worked so hard, and we hope that they get a full decision about what will happen with their exams. And as you said, Francis, I've got friends who are teachers and they've got children now off school, and I think it's going to be challenging in many fronts, actually, lots of children off school.
I mean, the thing about exams as well is they weren't always that fair, were they? On one day, you go in a room and you have to... So, in some ways, this could be a fair process for them, actually.
I think also the universities will be sympathetic. I'm at the University of Liverpool. There's been a lot of thinking about both looking after our current students, who are now all working remotely, not missing any lessons, it's all happening online, but also how we will look after future students and make sure they have fair access. As you've said, this will be the COVID generation.
There's one further really important point to make, which is that when the kids are off school, they mustn't go and stay with their grandparents if they're over 70, because that would be counterproductive.
That's a very vague way of saying that you could end up giving Nan and Grandad a death sentence.
So the kids have got to stay with people who are
who's going to look
under
after
those
them?
kids stay in school, though, who
only
have grandparents as an option. They should probably...
I think that is quite an important point, and perhaps slightly surprising. I think schools, clearly something had to change, and there's this now big decision you're having to make over what are key workers. An alternative approach would have been to say school is no longer compulsory in this country, and parents can decide what the needs are, their own needs and the needs of the children, and then you would avoid this really difficult decision about what's a key worker, because most workers are key in some way. And then those who could look after their own kids, because between the parents they can work it out who can stay at home, that would work. Those where the grandparents are the only option and we don't want them staying with grandparents, they could then be put into school, and it would be a much smaller number than it is now. It could be judged according to the number of teachers. You've got a lot more space in school because not everybody's there. So, it would have been, potentially, it would have been an alternative approach.
Well, we will hear tomorrow. I know there's a limit to how much you want to tell us. Our hour is up, I'm afraid, I have to say. It's been an interesting way of doing the programme. I'm pleased to say Question Time will be back. Yes, it's been rather quiet in some senses. I have to say I have missed you, audience, not having you here. I'm pleased to say that we will be back next week and for this foreseeable future, live at 8 o'clock on Thursday nights. So if you want to be part of our virtual audience, as we are doing it at the moment, do go to the Question Time website and apply in the usual way. And if you want to have your say on what we've been discussing this evening, you can join Adrian, Charles and guests on Question Time Extra Time. As always, that's on 5 Live now. And you can also listen to the Coronavirus podcast on BBC Sounds. But thank you very much to the panel for coming tonight, and to everyone who recorded a question or got in touch during the programme. From Weston Super Mare, Bye-bye.
Well, again, even though there was no audience, Question Time still manages to maintain its bias. The questions from the virtual audience were longer than usual. I think they were done in one location, different settings though. It seemed like the same coloured wall was behind those asking the questions, but some were sat down and others were standing up. As usual though, fair play for making it to the end of the video. Maybe one day normal service will be resumed. Time's the biggest thing for me. It takes about 15 hours to get one of these videos done. So I'd appreciate it if you'd give it a like and maybe click on the subscribe button. And with that, I'll end it here. See you soon.